Your methods are outdated and inefficient, he declared, not even looking at me, eyes fixed instead on the framed MBA diploma behind my head. We need modern approaches. My name is Logan Crowley, 58 years old, and until exactly 10 minutes ago, I was the Senior Systems Administrator at St. James Medical Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 15 years spent maintaining the digital pulse of a 300-bed hospital, all erased in a 20-minute meeting. Blake Winters, our new director, sat behind what had always been Dr. Harrison's desk. He was 42, suited up, full of buzzwords, and with not even a sliver of medical experience. 4 months into his new role and already wielding his title like a hammer. His consultant, Devin, stood silently near the window, thumbing through his phone, probably updating his LinkedIn before I'd even left the premises. The consulting team will take over the transition to cloud-based architecture, Blake continued, his voice clipped and rehearsed. We've prepared a severance package, 2 months' salary and the standard NDA. I nodded slowly, the weight of my ID badge suddenly heavier than ever. 15 years and not once had our systems failed on my watch. Not during the ransomware scare in 2018, not during the statewide grid failure in 2020, not even when budget cuts halved my staff and I worked 80-hour weeks just to hold everything together. The security team will escort you to collect your personal items, Blake added, sliding a bland folder across the desk like this was some ordinary termination. We'll need your badge and credentials. I unclipped my ID and placed it beside the folder. The master passwords are on the secure drive, I said quietly. Fully documented. Excellent, Blake replied, allowing himself his first smile of the meeting. I'm glad you're being reasonable, Logan. Change is hard, but it's necessary. I looked at Devin, maybe 30, if that, already inching forward, practically reaching for my chair. In his entire 3-week evaluation, he hadn't asked me a single question about our infrastructure. Not one. Is there anything else? Blake asked. I could have told them about the custom firewall patches I'd built after the last breach attempt. I could have explained the brittle integration between the ancient pharmacy database and the newer patient record system. I should have warned them about the specialized backup sequence that had to be triggered manually. But I just shook my head. No. Nothing else. I walked out beside the security guard, past the nurses who used to call me at 3 a.m. When things broke, past the surgical desk where I'd rebuilt the corrupted database line by line one bleak winter night, past the quiet corners of a place that had become a second home. In the parking lot, I placed my box of belongings, photos, a thermos, a thank you card from pediatrics, on the passenger seat of my truck and drove away without looking back. They didn't just reject my skills. They wanted to erase my presence. It would take exactly 1 week before they'd realize the cost of that decision. I joined St. James right after turning 50, a midlife pivot I never planned. The private tech firm I'd spent years with downsized during the recession, and Catherine's cancer treatments were draining our savings fast. The hospital offered stability, decent benefits, and a new purpose. So I dove into learning medical systems from scratch. The first person who welcomed me was Dr. Harrison. He didn't care much for glossy tech demos. Dashboards don't save lives, Logan. Reliability does. And that became my mission, bulletproof reliability. Redundant servers, manual overrides, off-grid fail-safes. Not flashy, but solid. I skipped holidays to rebuild our imaging system when it failed unexpectedly. Missed Megan's college graduation to finish a risky software migration overnight. Catherine understood. You're not fixing computers, she'd say. You're keeping people alive. She passed 8 years ago, but I kept showing up because the hospital had become my lifeline too. The people, my extended family. Nurse Jacobs from oncology always brought me coffee during updates. Dr. Patel from cardiology once waited an hour just to shake my hand after I saved his morning surgeries. Even Luis, the janitor, would sit and talk with me during 2 a.m. server checks. But everything changed when Dr. Harrison retired last winter. The board brought in Blake Winters from a sleek hospital chain in Chicago. First move? An efficiency audit. I saw the writing on the wall before anyone said a word. Blake never once attended our IT briefings. Not fully. He'd show up, glance around impatiently, check his watch, and leave before the real discussions began. Never asked about system architecture. Never stayed long enough to hear what held everything together. Then came Devin, flanked by his polished consulting team in matching company polos, all smiles and surface-level charm. Their pitch? Digital transformation, cloud migration, system modernization. Buzzwords stacked on buzzwords. I tried explaining, ours wasn't a standard setup. The patient record system talked to 17 different platforms, some off the shelf, some custom-coded by vendors long out of business. We've handled dozens of hospital migrations, Devin interrupted. It's all pretty standard. But it wasn't. They didn't see it, didn't want to. Their network diagrams plastered on conference room walls looked impressive, but they skipped over entire layers of infrastructure. Questions about lab data syncing? Ignored. Concerns about power redundancy during imaging uploads? Brushed off. My detailed emails outlining failover protocols got perfunctory. Thanks, noted. Replies, no questions, no follow-ups. One Friday afternoon, I returned from lunch to find contractors measuring my office. Just prepping for renovations, one muttered, avoiding eye contact. I went home and updated my resume that night. Deep down I knew. I was a relic in their eyes, too experienced, too attached. But I still couldn't believe they'd actually removed the only person who truly knew how every piece of the system fit. But they didn't just want a new system, they wanted a new narrative. One that didn't include the old guy with the graying beard who kept raising red flags. 2 days after they let me go, the truth sank in, not in a triumphant way, but in a quiet, sinking kind of certainty. I sat in my living room, laptop open, half scrolling through job listings I wasn't ready to apply for, surrounded by cold coffee and forgotten takeout. My phone started buzzing. First it was Alan from the IT team. Hey Logan, what's the backup process for surgical scheduling again? A minute later, Denise. Do you have the config notes for the pharmacy API integration? I stared at their messages, knowing I couldn't respond. My NDA was clear, no assistance, no access, no contact. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like watching a house catch fire knowing exactly where the extinguisher was, and not being allowed to reach for it. They didn't just lose a tech lead. They'd unknowingly severed the hospital from 15 years of living memory. Our systems weren't plug and play. They were layered, patched, interdependent organisms. Interfaces that had been reverse-engineered to connect incompatible vendor software. Manual override flows designed when automation failed in high-risk cases. Compliance workarounds developed to pass audits. Of course, I documented it all, hundreds of pages, step-by-step guides, annotated diagrams, contingency plans. All neatly stored in the secure drive. But documentation is just ink on a page. It can't substitute for instincts. It can't anticipate which update might trigger a failure loop unless you've seen it happen before. It couldn't replace me. Then the call started. Blake's number. I let it ring. The voicemail came seconds later. Logan, we're having some issues with the pharmacy system integration. Just a quick question. Call me back. I deleted it. Then came 2 more. Each more desperate. Critical error during EHR sync. Need guidance on backup restoration. I deleted those 2 and poured another cup of coffee. That evening, Dr. Patel called me directly, from his personal number. Logan, you hear what happened today? I didn't say anything. Emergency came in, a trauma case. System couldn't pull up the patient history. No allergies, no med list. Had to call the last 2 hospitals to piece it together. Took over 40 minutes. I exhaled slowly. No one was hurt, this time, he said. But it's bad. Blake's team looks lost. They're talking about going back to paper records. Temporary, but still. I closed my eyes. Not because I wanted revenge. Not out of pride. But because everything I had worked so hard to hold together was falling apart without a sound. The system was failing, and they still didn't fully understand why. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, voice steady. Blake's asking if anyone has your number. Dr. Patel added, quieter this time. They seem overwhelmed. Nothing's working the way they expected. I thought of the backup server hidden behind the maintenance panel, still running, probably, as no one had shut it down properly. I thought of the paper logs and offline boot instructions stored in the fire safe in my old office. The same ones no one had likely touched since I left. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder. A reminder of what happens when experience gets labeled obsolete by someone chasing short-term wins. By Thursday, the local news had picked up the story. System failures cripple St. James Medical Center, the anchor said, serious and steady. Patient care impacted following internal shake-up. I watched from my living room couch, the same one I'd barely left since Monday, as a young reporter stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital I'd given 15 years of my life to. Sources inside confirm multiple departments have experienced widespread system outages following a recent IT leadership change, she reported. Emergency paper protocols are in place as experts attempt to restore functionality. The camera panned to the ambulance bay I once helped equip with real-time patient tracking. It stung. My phone rang. Jennifer Walsh, Director of Tech at Riverside Medical. Saw the news about St. James, she said. You holding up okay? I'm all right, I replied. Looking forward to starting Monday. She paused. About that. I just got a rather interesting call from someone on the St. James board. A Dr. Eleanor Hughes. I sat up. I know Dr. Hughes. Head of surgery. One of the few who actually understood what we did. Well, Jennifer said, she wasn't just calling to check your references. She had a few things to say about what's really going on at St. James. My pulse quickened. Like what? I asked. Turns out, Blake didn't act alone, she said. He's been working with a company called Helix Solutions Group. 4 months. The name hit like a gut punch. Helix Solutions. An infamously slick healthcare IT contractor that wooed hospitals with upfront savings, then locked them into expensive proprietary systems with limited visibility and zero flexibility. They pitched the board on a system-wide overhaul, Jennifer explained. If St. James adopted Helix's platform, Blake would hit his cost-cutting benchmarks and get a performance bonus. Everything fell into place. My firing wasn't about innovation. It was about making way for a quiet corporate takeover. They needed you out of the way, Jennifer continued. Helix promised a clean transition. The board had no idea how specialized your systems were. I nodded slowly, jaw tightening. My team and I had designed everything around one principle: patient-first reliability. Our systems didn't just log data, they supported trauma resuscitations, tracked cardiac episodes, coordinated organ transplants. The kind of systems you build when you care about the people using them, not just the numbers on a spreadsheet. How bad is it really? I asked. Jennifer hesitated. According to Dr. Hughes, it's worse than what the media is reporting. ER patients are being rerouted. Critical care units are operating manually. The State Compliance Board is looking into it. I looked down at my coffee, now cold. This wasn't what I wanted. I never wanted the hospital to suffer. I wanted Blake to learn a lesson, maybe. But not at the cost of patient safety. There's more, Jennifer said. Before Helix came in, Blake had all department heads sign off on a tech assessment. It claimed your systems were outdated, non-compliant, high risk. I laughed bitterly. That's a lie. We passed every compliance audit. We had 99.98% uptime last year. Dr. Hughes knows that. She does now, Jennifer confirmed. The board is realizing they were misled. After we hung up, I opened my laptop. There it was, an email from Dr. Hughes herself, timestamped just an hour ago. The subject line read simply, "A personal apology." "Logan, I owe you an apology," she wrote. "The board approved the IT restructuring based on incomplete and, we now believe, manipulated data. We've reviewed your documentation. The outdated systems you built exceeded industry benchmarks for reliability and security. The metrics presented by Helix were cherry-picked and false. Blake misrepresented the state of our infrastructure to push this transition through. The result has been catastrophic." She continued, "We've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I'd like to invite you to attend and share your insight. No obligation, but hearing from you directly may help us make the right decision moving forward. Regardless of what you choose, please know that many of us now see the disservice done to you and to our hospital." I stared at the screen, the words washing over me. This wasn't about me getting my job back. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about the truth finally breaking through. My firing had never been about outdated skills. It had been about clearing a path, for profit, for control, for someone else's agenda. I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. For 15 years, I'd kept things running so smoothly no one had to think about the systems. Now they couldn't stop thinking about them. And maybe that was the real legacy I left behind. It was never just about replacing a loyal employee. It was about dismantling a fully functioning ecosystem to make room for profit. I arrived at the boardroom of St. James Hospital on Friday morning, exactly 15 minutes early. The same way I'd shown up for every leadership meeting, tech briefing, and emergency strategy session over the last 15 years. A few board members were already seated, among them Dr. Hughes, who gave me a firm handshake and a quiet, almost relieved, nod. "Thank you for coming, Logan," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," I replied truthfully. The room filled quickly after that, faces I'd worked alongside for years, from administrators and department heads to veteran nurses and senior physicians. Blake was the last to walk in. He paused in the doorway when he saw me already seated at the long conference table, visibly thrown off. Devon, the Helix consultant, followed a step behind him, no longer exuding the same smug certainty he had the morning I was fired. Dr. Hughes called the meeting to order. "We're here to address the ongoing system failures and to reassess our agreement with Helix Solutions," she began, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. Then she turned to me. "Mr. Logan Crowley has graciously agreed to provide his technical review of the current situation." All eyes shifted toward me. For 15 years, I'd worked behind the scenes, quiet and dependable, keeping systems stable without fanfare or fuss. Now I was the one everyone was waiting to hear from. The digital systems at St. James were not generic plug-and-play platforms, I began. They were carefully tailored, over more than a decade, to meet the specific, often critical needs of this hospital. Every customization had a clinical purpose. Every interface solved the real problem faced by frontline staff. I opened my laptop and connected to the projector. The screen behind me lit up with the same system documentation I had painstakingly created over the years, hundreds of pages covering architecture, procedures, and emergency protocols. "Everything needed to maintain these systems is right here," I said. "Fully documented, fully operational. But the problem isn't with the documentation. It's that Helix's system simply isn't compatible with the way this hospital actually functions." Blake tried to interject. "The compatibility issues are temporary. Helix has implemented their platform in dozens of hospitals, successfully." I nodded, already prepared. "And those hospitals?" I clicked to the next slide. A side-by-side list popped up. All new builds or brand new infrastructures. Not a single one had to be retrofitted around legacy systems or critical care protocols developed over years. "That's the difference." Dr. Patel leaned forward. "These are all clean slate facilities." "Exactly," I said. "But here at St. James, our systems evolved through necessity. Through trial and error. They're complex because healthcare is complex. Helix knew that. I reviewed their own technical specs. I continued highlighting sections on the projector. These here? They directly contradict claims made in their proposal. Their platform is incompatible with our pharmacy systems, radiology integrations, and even parts of our trauma response workflow. There was a shift in the room. Board members exchanged looks. Dr. Hughes turned to Blake. Were you aware of these incompatibilities when you recommended the Helix contract? Blake's polished tone cracked. The internal assessment suggested the transition risks would be minimal. The assessment you oversaw personally? I asked. I pulled up an internal memo forwarded to me by a former colleague. And this email, where you asked department heads to highlight system weaknesses and downplay stability metrics. The room fell quiet. I hadn't come to bury Blake. I'd come to expose what needed to be seen. The truth is, I said, you can't swap out these systems like you're changing vendors. You're trying to run advanced care on architecture that wasn't built for it, and the result has already affected patient outcomes. Dr. Hughes looked around the room. I think we've heard enough to make a decision. Blake stood up, defensive. You can't seriously consider derailing a complete modernization strategy because of the opinions of a, let's be honest, disgruntled ex-employee. Before she could respond, Dr. Patel spoke. We've had to divert 67 emergency patients in the past week. 3 critical surgeries were postponed. Medication errors are up 12%. That's not an opinion, Director Winters. That's reality. The vote was called 20 minutes later. The Helix contract would be terminated immediately. An emergency rollback would begin that same afternoon, restoring the systems I had built from the ground up. As I packed up my laptop and closed the lid, Dr. Hughes approached me. Logan, she said quietly, the board has another proposition, if you're willing to hear it. I looked up at her, knowing this time I had the choice. Blake stood by the door, deflated and quiet. I'm listening, I said. 3 weeks later, I walked through the front doors of St. James Medical Center wearing a new ID badge, Logan Crowley, Chief Technology Officer. A different role, but the same hospital. The turnaround hadn't been smooth. The Helix team had left behind a trail of half-integrated modules and broken dependencies. Some core databases were corrupted. Others had entire logs missing. My new team, an energized mix of seasoned staff and hand-picked newcomers, had worked day and night. We restored interfaces, rebuilt authentication protocols, retrieved what we could, and secured what we couldn't afford to lose. It wasn't just about fixing systems. It was about restoring trust. Blake was gone. The internal announcement framed it as pursuing new opportunities. I hadn't asked for his dismissal, but I wasn't sorry to read those words either. At the cardiology nurses' station, I was greeted by a familiar face. Nurse Jacobs looked up and smiled warmly. Systems are running smoother than ever, she said, tapping her monitor. Patient records loading like it's 2030. Good to hear, I replied, scanning the dashboard. Any hiccups? Not since you came back, she said. Feels like night and day. As I moved down the hall, Dr. Patel joined me, falling into step like we'd done it for years. Heading to the board meeting? He asked. I nodded. Quarterly tech review, I said. First time I'll be on that side of the table instead of standing in the corner with a slide deck. We reached the boardroom. Hospital leadership was already gathering. Dr. Hughes, now serving as interim director, offered a nod as I entered. Mr. Crowley, we're eager to hear from you. I connected my laptop. The screen displayed a clean dashboard, system health, uptime rates, restored backups, comparison metrics, before and after the Helix fiasco. Recovery is complete, I began. All systems restored with no data loss. We've implemented new failsafes and monitoring layers to ensure this never happens again. Dr. Hughes leaned forward. And what about the modernization initiatives Director Winters was so concerned with? I clicked to the next slide. This is our 5-year technology roadmap. Built for gradual evolution, not sudden overhaul. It aligns innovation with operational stability. Because true modernization doesn't bulldoze what works, it strengthens it. Heads around the table nodded. The board voted unanimously to approve the plan. 6 months later, I sat on my back porch sipping coffee as the sun dipped low across the trees. My phone buzzed. A message from Jennifer Walsh at Riverside lit up the screen. Heard St. James just won the Regional Excellence in Healthcare Tech Award. Congrats, almost colleague. I smiled, typing back. Thanks. Sorry for the last-minute career twist. Her reply came instantly. No hard feelings. You ended up exactly where you were meant to be. She was right. I belonged at St. James. But not as the silent guardian no one noticed until things went wrong. Not anymore. As CTO, I finally had a seat at the table, a say in decisions that shaped not only infrastructure, but patient outcomes. My job wasn't just to keep the lights on. It was to ensure the hospital never again forgot the value of the systems and people who kept it running. The hospital had learned something through its crisis. That experience isn't outdated. That loyalty isn't a liability. That some knowledge can't be replaced with a contract or a cloud platform. I pulled up a photo from last week's staff appreciation dinner. My team, old hands and new minds, stood side by side, smiling beneath a banner that read, "Excellence through dedication." On the table in front of us was a plaque recognizing our department's contribution to patient care. 15 years of work with no recognition. Now, my name was on the agenda. My expertise was no longer hidden in server logs or buried in footnotes. It was acknowledged. Valued. I thought of Blake now and then, wondering whether he'd learned anything. Last I'd heard, he'd taken a job at a tech startup promising revolutionary disruption of healthcare administration. Some lessons take longer to land. My new ID badge sat beside my coffee. I picked it up and ran my thumb across the embossed title, Chief Technology Officer. Not just the guy they called when the system crashed. Now I was helping shape the system itself. I hadn't wanted revenge. I'd wanted something far simpler. Recognition, not of ego, but of truth. The truth that experience matters. That not everything needs reinventing. That sometimes the most forward-thinking move is protecting what already works.